My name's Dan Snow and I want to tell you about History Hit TV. It's like the Netflix for history. Hundreds of exclusive documentaries and interviews with the world's best historians. We've got an exclusive offer available to fans of Timeline. If you go to History Hit TV, you can either follow the information below this video or just Google History Hit TV and use the code TIMELINE. You get a special introductory offer. Go and check it out. In the meantime, enjoy this video.
It is one of the great mysteries of ancient history. In the early 2nd century AD, a Roman legion vanished from the historical record.
They're not there, so at some point in the 2nd century, something happens to them, they disappear, they're disbanded, something.
Here you've got 5,500 soldiers of Rome's elite fighting army. What happens to them?
We do not know what happened to it. It literally disappears from history.
It remains one of the mysteries. We need to find out.
Now, with the help of leading experts, I'm going to dive deeper into the story.
I'm going to be travelling across Britain, visiting some of the key sites associated with the 9th Legion on this island. From the central role it played in helping extend Rome's control, to a brutal run-in with Britain's most famous warrior queen. The question of what happened to the 9th Legion has fascinated people for centuries. This is the story of the 9th Legion.
I've always been interested in Roman history for as long as I can remember, but one of the key things that really sparked the interest was when my dad read to me this book, The Eagle of the Ninth, when I was 6 or 7 years old. First published in the 1950s, it was written by Rosemary Sutcliffe, and the story centres around a Roman legion, the 9th Legion, sent north from York to crush an uprising beyond Hadrian's Wall. But the legion never returned. It was destroyed, and its precious eagle standard was lost.
Rosemary Sutcliffe was a fantastic author. I mean, she's somebody who suffered through illness throughout her entire life and didn't get out much, but her imagination was amazing. And when The Eagle of the Ninth came out, it was such a captivating story. I guess, I mean, archaeologists can look at it today and say there are certain parts which don't quite ring true anymore, but the idea of a legion being lost in northern Britain, about a son trying to find out what happened to his father, about sort of the loss of honour, trying to recover this eagle, and pinning it all to an archaeological discovery.
This archaeological discovery was the Silchester eagle. Discovered in the late 19th century, this Roman bronze cast eagle is extraordinary. Its talons are clawed over as if gripping onto something. Its head is tilted slightly to the right. Although it is now not believed to be a legionary eagle, it inspired Rosemary Sutcliffe to write her famous novel.
Rosemary Sutcliffe makes that brilliant link of saying this is possibly the eagle standard of the 9th Legion, and if it was, why is it in Silchester, in southern Britain, in Berkshire, and not anywhere near York where they may have died? So she's creating this fantastic story about people going north and, so spoiler alert, retrieving the eagle and bringing it south and giving it an honourable burial. So it's a fantastic story, and it's a real sort of boy's own heroic tale.
Although a fictional story, the Eagle of the Ninth has its roots in one of the great mysteries of ancient history. In the 2nd century AD, Rome's 9th Legion, Legio IX Hispana, disappears from the historical record, vanishes. Over the decades, over the centuries, there have been many theories put forward as to what happened to this lost legion. But for me, what is just as interesting, what is just as amazing, is what we do know about Rome's 9th Legion, what we do know in particular about this legion during the just under 100 years that we're for certain sure that it spent in Roman Britain. Filled with military successes, but also some disastrous defeats, the story of the 9th Legion that we do know is worthy of an epic in its own right, and its story deserves to be told. By the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire dominated the Mediterranean, possessing one of the most formidable military forces in history. Rome's conquering army was divided into legions, each one a unit containing just over 5,000 soldiers. Every legion had its own extraordinary story, and the 9th Legion was no exception.
Now the interesting thing is that there were at least 2 9th Legions. So the first 9th Legion originates in the 80s BC in the social wars in the later Roman Republic, and this then becomes an elite fighting force. It fights with Caesar throughout all of his campaigns in Gaul, the sanguinous conquest of Gaul, when he himself claims he killed 1 million and enslaved 1 million. Well, part of that story is the 9th Legion, the original 9th Legion. This 9th Legion almost certainly came to Britain in at least one of Caesar's 2 incursions to Britain in 55 and 54 BC. And this same 9th Legion then participates in his later campaigns, fighting Pompey in the Balkans, Macedonia and in Greece, the Battle of Pharsalus, and then in North Africa and then in Spain. It's an elite legion. But the year before Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, it is disbanded, and we don't know why. But in true Roman fashion, within 2 years, it's reformed. So after Caesar's death, Octavian reforms it, and it again becomes another elite legion. So it fights through all the major campaigns of the later civil wars. It fights at Philippi. Then when he becomes Augustus, after being called emperor for the first time by the Senate in 27 BC, it fights in his Cantabrian Wars in Spain. So it's participating in all the major conflicts of Octavian, later Augustus's reign. So this is an elite legion.
But the 9th's record of service was soon stained by an infamous event.
For the first time, we see it in a negative light, because there's an occasion when it rebels. And interestingly, this is a theme which you can see then threaded through the rest of the history of the 9th Legion. No longer is it this bright shining light, this true heroic Roman legion, but suddenly things start over time, over a long chronology, to go wrong. In this first instance, in the beginning of the 1st century AD, you have this rebellion, this insurrection involving the legion. Ultimately, the legion then comes back into the front line again of the Roman military, and latterly it is chosen as one of the 4 legions to take part in the Claudian Invasion of Britain under Aulus Plautius on behalf of the Emperor Claudius, AD 43, and it plays a key role in the invasion.
By the end of 43 AD, the Romans had reached Camalodunum, modern-day Colchester, and here the Emperor Claudius received the surrenders of British chiefs. The invasion was at an end. The province of Britannia was declared. It had ended in success. The Emperor Claudius, he had his conquest. But for the 9th, the fighting was far from over.
We've got Roman troops essentially heading west and northwards. It's vital to go west, because although the tribes predominantly in the south and east are on Rome's side, they understand the need for good relationships with Rome, and a lot of their leaders are very pro-Roman. To the west, you've got the good mineral resources, you've got the gold in central Wales, you've got lead and tin in the West Country, you've got a whole range of sort of materials which will make Britain economically viable if you can start mining that. So it's vital that the troops go west and start to incorporate that bit into the Roman Empire. But the trouble is, going west is you've got tribes and people who've had no history of contact with Rome, so they're not necessarily on Rome's side, they haven't traded with Rome.
Resistance remained in the west, riled up by a British leader called Creighton.
That's a problem, because the Emperor Claudius has gone back to Rome and said it's all over, the conquest is complete, and yet there's still this character who is loose, who is causing trouble. It's that sense of you can't complete the conquest until Creighton is brought back in Rome in chains or is dead. So he becomes the major target for the Romans. They have to get him if they can convince the rest of the Roman Empire that the conquest of Britain is finished.
Yet as Rome was dealing with Creighton and this resistance in the west, the 9th was heading in a different direction.
The 9th Legion is going up the east coast as far as we can see. I mean, the good thing about the Roman legions is they all, whenever they're building a fort, they stamp their tiles. So we've got a lot of numbers. We can see the 2nd Legion is going down towards Dorset and Exeter. The 20th and the 14th Legions are going up into Wales, up towards Anglesey. And the 9th Legion seems to be going up the eastern seaboard, going towards Lincoln and then up eventually towards York. So to begin with, the 9th isn't involved directly in the war against Creighton, but it is involved in trying to make sure that the eastern side of Britain is kept secure, and more critically the northern frontier is secure, because to the north you've got this the tribe, the Brigantes, which is a massive tribal confederation, really from southern Yorkshire right the way up to Northumberland, covering an immense area. If they're peaceful, and if they can be persuaded to be on Rome's side, then the rest of the soldiers can move into Wales, they can start hunting down Creighton. And also the 9th can stop Creighton from going northwards and trying to foment rebellion up there too. So they have a very important role early on, but they're not directly involved with the war against the British leaders.
By 60 AD, the 9th Legion had played a central role in helping Rome establish the fledgling Roman province of Britannia. It had played a key role in the invasion. It had played a key role in the breakout campaigns. It had established itself on Rome's northern edge, founding a legionary fortress at Lincoln. But it would be then that the 9th faced its greatest challenge to date, a massive British revolt led by one of the most famous warrior women in our island's history.
Boudica was the queen of a British tribe called the Iceni, who were a Roman client tribe or a client state. So actually, nominally, they were allies of Rome, and the Romans did deals with some of the populations when they conquered a territory. If it would save them time in the conquest of the more difficult parts of the territory, do a deal with one of the tribes which are more acquiescent, and this is the Iceni, who are in North Norfolk. So doing a deal with them allowed the Legion of the 9th to actually start its campaign in the Midlands and the North. All well and good. However, jump forward to AD 60-61. Boudica's husband dies, and in his will he's left his kingdom as a client state, his kingdom half to his daughters and half to Rome. Now, when you're a client state, the usual way of doing things is for the monarch who dies to leave all of his kingdom to Rome. So this actually gets the backs of the Romans up, and there's trouble. And the Romans send troops to force the Iceni to give up all of their territory, all of their portable wealth, possibly, to the Romans. And this sparks an insurrection. Some of the stories we hear at this point are of the Roman moneylenders calling in their loans to the aristocratic nobles of the Iceni, who they've lent money to become effectively Roman, to build grand public buildings, to wear togas, to educate their children in Latin in Rome. And by calling in the money, they're bankrupted. So an insurrection takes place. Also, we hear from the primary sources that maybe Boudica herself was ill-treated and her daughters raped as well. Whatever the truth, there's a major problem, and a rebellion starts. And it becomes a conflagration. Eventually, the whole of the southeast erupts into flames, and we have the Boudican revolt.
For the 9th, stationed to the northwest, this was a major problem.
Now, at the time of the Boudican revolt, the 9th Legion is based in its very recently founded legionary fortress at Lincoln. It would have had vexillations based further south, but the majority of troops would have been at Lincoln. However, given that the revolt is in North Norfolk, they're the first responders. And imagine the scene. You've got Boudica marching down from North Norfolk. She's approaching Colchester, the provincial capital, where Claudius earlier announced the province of Britannia to exist. The commander, the legate of the Legion, Cerealis, decides to put together an emergency force from the 9th Legion. Probably no more than 2,000 men, so less than half the Legion. So vexillations of legionaries, and also maybe auxiliaries, especially auxiliary cavalry. And they hot-foot it down to try to intercept Boudica as she marches from North Norfolk down to Colchester.
But things didn't go as planned.
First, they get there too late, so when they get to Colchester, it's been torched, and all the Roman colonial settlers there have been killed. Secondly, when they eventually do engage Boudica and her force, which by this time may have amounted to maybe 100,000, we're only talking about 2,000 Romans here. So even though of those 100,000 native Britons in revolt, only a small percentage may have been actual warriors, still the odds against the Romans here are huge. Nevertheless, Cerealis with his 2,000 men tries to intercept Boudica, and he's defeated to the extent where he runs away. So the legionary legate, the general in charge of the legion, legs it, and he goes with his guard cavalry, and they go and hide in a fort nearby until the Boudican revolt's put down. So the first story we have of the 9th Legion fighting a battle in terms of the Boudicca revolt is very negative indeed.
The battle was a catastrophic defeat for Cerealis and his portion of the 9th Legion. It was the first major military disaster that we know of that the Romans had suffered on this island. By the end of the day, perhaps as many as 2,000 legionaries had perished. Boudicca's revolt would ultimately be put down at the Battle of Watling Street and in its aftermath, but the damage Boudicca and her warriors had dealt to the 9th Legion was severe. It was in desperate need of replenishing, and we hear in the aftermath of the revolt 2,000 more legionaries being sent to Britain, many of whom would have been sent straight to the 9th to replenish that dented legion. And we know the 9th was replenished because soon enough we hear of this legion back in the field once more.
Now, if we jump forward in time to the AD 70s, the 9th Legion comes back into focus again, but with the same guy involved, the same Roman leader, Cerealis. But this time Cerealis isn't the failed legionary legate, having lost his battle with Boudicca. He's now rebuilt his reputation with the new Flavian dynasty in the context of the Batavian revolt, and he becomes the governor of Britain. And he gets given orders to create wealth and create glory for the new Flavian dynasty. And he gets told to conquer the far north of Britain, which includes the Brigantes tribe in the north. And the 9th Legion gets given orders to march north and begin this conquest process. The first thing they do is they march to the River Ouse, where they then build another legionary fort, and this is today's York.
York has its fair share of extraordinary Roman history. In 306 AD, Constantine I, better known as Constantine the Great, was proclaimed emperor here by his soldiers, probably very near to where I'm standing now, at the Principia, the heart of Roman York, which is today underneath York Minster. Almost 100 years earlier, another Roman emperor, Septimius Severus, he came to York too. He established it as his capital for 3 years when he went campaigning further north in the heartlands of what is today Scotland. He ultimately died here in 211. And more than 100 years before that, that was when York was first established as a legionary fortress with the 9th Legion. It's quite surreal to think that all this incredible Roman history, well, it began with Legio 9 Hispana.
The 9th Legion were the builders of Roman York. They established here in the year 71 AD the first Roman structures in this part of the country, the first fortress of Eboracum, which was initially built out of earth and timber and then was later rebuilt in stone. And you can still see remnants of it here in York today.
York, as we understand it today, is essentially a Roman creation. It's a legionary fortress for the 9th. Now, legions are usually they're not on the front line, they're often away back, and it's the auxiliaries, the less well-paid troops that do the policing duties. But York is established as a major centre point, a major node in Rome's conquest of Britain, and that's the 9th. So the 9th is the most northerly of all the legions. So we've got the 20th Legion at Chester, we've got the 2nd at Caerleon in South Wales, but the 9th is primarily that unit on the northern frontier. So its role has always been heading northwards. It probably of all the legions, it better understands the Brigantes, the tribes to the north.
Those soldiers of the 9th Legion stationed at York were helping keep an eye over large swathes of territory owned by peoples such as the Brigantes. And archaeology survives that tells us more about one particular figure.
We're very lucky in the Yorkshire Museum to have some wonderful tombstones that provide really personal insights into individuals. This is one of them. This is the wonderful tombstone or tomb marker of an individual called Lucius Ducius Ruffinus. This individual, Lucius, was a soldier in the 9th Legion, and by looking closely at his tomb marker we can tell a lot about him. If we look at how Ruffinus is depicted in the tombstone, we can learn a lot about his role within the 9th Legion. You can see that he's holding a decorated pole in his left hand. Now that's a standard, and this tells us that he had a specific role in the Legion as a standard bearer. There would be one of these per century, that's around 80 soldiers, and they would support the centurion who was the head of that group. They had a very specific role in battle. They needed to make sure that all the fighting soldiers knew where their centurion was to keep morale up, and it was by holding this decorated pole high within the melee that they were able to do this. It's a very important and also a very dangerous role. Because they were holding this standard, they weren't able to protect themselves with a shield. What's so fantastic about this object is that it puts a name, a face and a personality to a member of the 9th Legion. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly when Ruffinus died, but we think it's quite likely that he was one of the first soldiers that was stationed here in Roman York, so one of the builders of the city.
Not all of the 9th would remain in and around York. During the late 1st century AD, detachments, or vexillations, were sent across Britain, as well as to the continent for service on the Rhine. But its most significant campaign would be under the command of one of the most renowned Roman governors of Britain.
Agricola is one of those governors of Britain for whom we actually know quite a lot, and that's because his son-in-law Tacitus wrote a biography. In fact, it's less of a biography, it's more of a sort of hagiography. It's a very sort of positive story about how great and wonderful his father-in-law was and all the wonderful things he did for Rome. But it's useful from our point of view because it gives us a sort of a year-by-year account.
So Agricola is probably the only Roman governor who could actually claim to have conquered the far north of Britain. And part of this process in his campaigns from, let's say, AD 78 through AD 83 involved directly, absolutely directly, the 9th Legion. The 9th Legion at the time were of 4 Roman legions in Britain, playing a key role in his campaigns, marching from the north of the province. Remember, at this time, the border's probably around the Solway Firth to the Tyne, so we're going north into the Scottish borders, and then we're going further north into Fife, and then further north into the Upper Midland Valley, just shy of the Highland line, and then we're going even further north towards the Moray lowlands. So this is a real attempt to conquer the far north of Britain.
One key place where we see the remains of extensive military activity by Agricola is in Perthshire.
And then they get to around a place called Inchtudel in Perthshire, and that's where they build a legionary fortress. It's the big fort in Scotland, the next nearest being York. They don't quite finish that, but we know they're campaigning around there. They're building their forts in around Perthshire.
I've come to the remains of Ardagh Roman fort in Scotland. Now, the fort here was first constructed by the Romans in the 1st century AD during the Flavian period. And the remains of the Flavian fort here can be seen. It's very extensive, the far reaches of the ditches visible to this day here.
Ardagh is a Roman fort in central Scotland in Perthshire, and it's one of the best surviving examples of its type anywhere in the Roman Empire. As you can see from the massive ramparts and ditches around its perimeter, it survives in really good quality condition.
The fort itself is an incredibly well preserved fort. A number of rampart and ditches still survive. It's on the route into the Highlands. Just slightly north of that, we seem to get a fortified signalling chain. Ardagh has a key role in that. It is pivotal. It is controlling activity in this area.
Obviously, when you visit Ardagh today, it seems quite quiet and peaceful, the wind blowing across a relatively empty field. You get to the ramparts and then you get an idea of the majesty. But what that does is hide the hive of activity that you'd have had going on there. You would have had these wooden barrack blocks, you would have had the headquarters building. You've got to imagine the noise of hundreds of men. You'd have had soldiers on guard at night time, and you've really got to imagine something that's quite busy. And often it's good to actually have a think about when you've watched some film or a television programme that's actually shown the Roman army, the battle scene at the beginning of Gladiator when they all come back and they're in the camp afterwards. And it shows you an image of something that's really quite dirty and smelly. And I think you've got to conjure up, this isn't this lovely windswept moor. This was a busy, active place full of soldiers.
So our dock, it's beautifully preserved with all of these deep ditches, these fortifications. You can just imagine what it would have originally looked like with a wooden wall surrounding it. It's an absolutely astonishing sight. And it may also, very tentatively, have a link to the 9th Legion. Now, when I say tentative link to the 9th, I mean very, very tentative. We have no evidence that the 9th was ever here. But the key for me was that we believe that this fort was first constructed, as I mentioned, in the Flavian period, so probably during the campaign of Agricola in the north, of which we know the 9th served.
Some forts, you're lucky enough to find something that actually gives you a date, like a coin hoard or something that actually has the latest date, which at least helps you to do that. We don't have that evidence for our dock, but we do have plenty of evidence shown that it was occupied in the 80s AD, so very much contemporary with Agricola's campaigns and would have been occupied when he was operating in Scotland.
Could the 9th Legion have been here at some point during that campaign? It's possible, but we don't know for sure. By AD 82, Agricola's campaign in the north had met with some astonishing success. He had constructed forts as far north as Perth, including perhaps this one, beautifully preserved at our dock. He had secured the land south of the Firth and the Clyde. He had campaigned on the islands to the west, and he had even, according to his son-in-law Tacitus, contemplated a future invasion of Ireland. But Agricola's campaign was far from finished.
Agricola returned his attention to the north, using the fleet and army in tandem to pressure his foe, the Caledonians, who put up a fierce resistance. The Caledonians went on the offensive, attacking forts and damaging Roman morale. The Caledonian assaults were terrifying and seemingly relentless, as the 9th Legion was about to find out.
To combat this Caledonian aggression, Agricola decided to divide his army into 3 separate sections, the weakest of which, according to Tacitus, was the 9th Legion. Now, why was the 9th the weakest? Well, perhaps some of the unit was elsewhere at the time, but now the 9th was exposed and the Caledonians pounced.
The 9th Legion, somewhere probably in the Upper Midland Valley, so just shy of the Highlands, is in a marching camp. And remember, a Roman military unit, specifically a legion, at the end of every night when they're campaigning in enemy territory, builds a marching camp. This is to defend itself from being attacked overnight, which proves very relevant here because on this given evening in AD 82, so we are told by Tacitus, the Roman historian, in his Agricola, the native Britons in the far north, we'll call them the Caledonians, attack in force completely out of the blue and almost overwhelm this entire legion of 5,500 men in its marching camp.
According to Tacitus, the sentries were caught off guard and the Caledonians got into the camp itself. What followed was anarchy. It must have been hell on earth. The 9th unprepared, the enemies swirling all around them. A nightmare.
Most Roman forts are designed so that troops can get out. They don't want to sit behind their walls, penned in. They've got multiple gateways, they can get out as quickly as they can, they can form up in the field, and then they can fight an enemy as they're trained to do so. But the 9th are caught in their fort.
So the 9th Legion is in danger of being overwhelmed by the Caledonians who are attacking in force. Tacitus says that Agricola arrives in the nick of time to save the legion from being annihilated.
He sent reinforcements, he sent his cavalry, and just in the nick of time, whilst the 9th were holding out, they managed to get some sort of order. Agricola's reinforcements came and routed the attacking Caledonians. The 9th was saved from total destruction, but the damage it had suffered was severe.
We don't know how many losses they suffered, but they go from being a premier fighting unit to one that has suffered significant losses. And later on, at the major battle of Mons Graupius, the legions, and specifically the 9th, does not take part. Agricola sends all his less well-paid auxiliary soldiers into the front line. They get mown. They're like cannon fodder. You know, it doesn't matter how many of them die because they're not ultimately Roman, but the legions are kept in reserve, and it might be that groups like the 9th have been so badly mauled by that stage that they're not fighting fit, and therefore they're not actually able to do the job.
This deadly night attack on the 9th Legion is an extraordinary story. But did it really happen?
The archaeological record and what is happening to the 9th are two very different things. We don't have any information that the enemy was burning down the fortification. We've got no archaeological evidence of that. The text itself says they just killed a few people. It doesn't say they were burning it down. So we don't really know what was happening. We've not found any evidence of dead Roman soldiers that have obvious marks of being slaughtered. We don't have the same about indigenous population. We don't have any sort of battle site. So the archaeology is not clear. In terms of the 9th Legion, we don't know where it happened, when it happened, and we have no archaeological evidence for that. Doesn't mean to say it didn't happen, it just means that we haven't discovered that, or perhaps Tacitus was just spinning a bit of a tall tale there.
What's so interesting about this infamous night attack, this mauling that the 9th suffers in Scotland, is that this is the last literary reference we ever hear of the 9th Legion.
It's the last time the 9th Legion is ever mentioned in history. Ever. That's it. It's never again mentioned in history.
So what happened to it? In the next episode, we look at what the archaeology can tell us.
You know, that's the point where they disappear.
So it did not take part in building the wall. For whatever reason, it wasn't around by then in Britain.
The possibility of them being lost somewhere on the Rhine, or just a disbandment.
As we dive into the mystery of the Lost Legion.